When someone suddenly ceases all contact, it's rarely about you. I want you to hear that clearly. It's not about you. It's about what they see in themselves, or rather, what they fear you've seen in them. When a person feels their ego is threatened, when they sense that the version of themselves they've been projecting is being questioned or unraveled, their instinct is often to retreat, to disappear, to cut all ties as a way to protect the fragile construct of who they think they are or who they've convinced themselves you need them to be. Now, ego is a tricky thing. It's not always about arrogance or pride in the obvious sense. Ego's about self-preservation, about clinging to an image, even when that image is far from the truth. Sometimes people put up a front, a version of themselves they want the world to see. They present themselves as confident, capable, maybe even vulnerable in just the right ways, but deep down, they're terrified of being truly seen. They know that if you get too close, you might see the cracks in the facade. And the closer you get, the harder it becomes for them to hide. So when they feel that happening, they retreat. Cutting off contact becomes their way of saying, you're getting too close. I can't let you see the parts of me I'm not ready to face myself. This isn't something they'll admit, of course. It's not something they'll even acknowledge to themselves. But it's there in their silence, in the sudden absence. Because if they felt secure in who they are, if they truly believed in the version of themselves they've been presenting, they wouldn't need to disappear. They wouldn't need to pull away when things get real. They'd be able to stand in the discomfort, in the vulnerability, and face whatever truth is on the table. But ego doesn't like discomfort. Ego doesn't like vulnerability. Ego likes control. And one of the quickest ways to regain control, especially when you feel like someone else is holding a mirror up to your flaws, is to disappear, to cut off the connection before the cracks in the image become too obvious. You've probably felt it, haven't you? That shift, that moment when things started to feel a little too real. Maybe you challenged them. Maybe you asked a question that made them uncomfortable. Or maybe you simply showed up as your authentic self, strong, self-assured, and unwilling to settle. And instead of rising to meet you, instead of stepping into the vulnerability that real connection requires, they chose the easy way out. They chose to retreat, to hide behind silence. Because engaging with you, being honest with you, would have meant facing parts of themselves they weren't ready to confront. It's important to remember that this isn't about your worth. It's not about what you did or didn't do. When someone's ego feels threatened, it doesn't matter how kind, patient, or understanding you are. It doesn't matter how much you've given to the relationship or how much potential you see in them. Their reaction isn't about you, it's about their inability to handle the weight of their own insecurities. They don't cut contact because you've done something wrong. They cut contact because you've done something right. You've held up a mirror. You've seen through the act. And that to them is unbearable. But here's the thing about ego. It's fragile. It's defensive, and it's a poor substitute for true confidence and self-awareness. A person who is secure in themselves doesn't need to run when things get real. They don't need to retreat into silence when their flaws are exposed or when their carefully curated image starts to crack. They lean in. They do the work. They embrace the discomfort because they know that's where real growth and connection happen. And if someone isn't willing or able to do that, it's not your job to fix them. It's not your responsibility to make them feel safe enough to stay. That's their journey, not yours. So when someone ceases all contact because they feel their ego is threatened, let them go. Let them sit with their silence. Let them wrestle with their reflection. You don't need to chase after them, trying to prove that you're not the enemy, that you didn't mean to threaten their sense of self. Because the truth is, their reaction isn't about you. It's about their relationship with themselves, with their own fears and insecurities. And until they're ready to face that, there's nothing you can say or do that will change their behavior. What you can do is protect your peace, honor your own boundaries, recognize that their silence says more about them than it does about you, and trust that the right people, the ones who are willing to face themselves, to grow, to show up authentically, will never need to disappear when things get real. They'll stay, they'll do the work, they'll meet you where you are. And that's the kind of connection you deserve. Anything less, let it go. When someone cuts off all contact, it's often because they're trying to escape something. Not you, but the accountability, facing the consequences of their actions or inactions. It's easier for them to vanish into silence than to stay and have the hard conversations, the ones that require them to reflect, admit, or take responsibility. Silence becomes their escape route, their way to sidestep the discomfort that comes with owning up to the truth. But let me tell you something. That silence speaks louder than any words ever could. Accountability is not an easy thing to face. It demands vulnerability, honesty, and most of all, growth. Some people are simply not ready for that. When they realize their actions have caused hurt, disappointment, or confusion, they're faced with two choices. The first is to confront it, to sit down, take responsibility, and engage in a dialogue that might challenge them in ways they're not prepared for. The second is to avoid it entirely, to run, to disappear, to pretend the problem doesn't exist. And for some, that second option feels safer, easier. But easy doesn't mean right. The truth is, avoiding accountability is a choice rooted in fear. Fear of being exposed, fear of having to admit, even to themselves, that they've fallen short in some way, fear of being held to a standard they feel they can't meet. It's not that they don't know what they did or didn't do. They know, deep down they know, but instead of facing it, they retreat into silence, hoping the distance will make the problem go away. That's safe. The struggle with a strategy, plain and simple, one designed to protect their ego and avoid the discomfort of growth. What's heartbreaking is how much that silence can leave you questioning yourself. When someone cuts off contact, it's natural to wonder what you did wrong, to replay conversations, interactions, moments in your head, trying to pinpoint where things went off track. But let me tell you something. It's not about what you did or didn't do. It's about what they couldn't handle. Accountability requires strength, and not everyone is ready to carry that weight. Their silence isn't a reflection of your value, it's a reflection of their limitations. Sometimes the reason they cut off contact is that they know the truth would demand too much of them. Maybe they'd have to explain why they didn't show up the way they promised. Maybe they'd have to admit they weren't as invested as they led you to believe. Or maybe they'd have to confront the fact that their actions or lack thereof hurt you. Those are not easy truths to sit with. But instead of facing them head on, they choose the path of least resistance. They cut off contact and convince themselves that avoiding the conversation is better than stumbling through it. But let's be clear about something. Avoiding accountability doesn't make the problem disappear. It only postpones it. Silence might feel like an escape in the moment, but it's a temporary one, because sooner or later we all have to reckon with the choices we've made. Sooner or later they'll have to face themselves, their actions, their truths. And when that moment comes, it won't be easy for them, but that's their journey to navigate, not yours. It's important to remember that their avoidance is not your responsibility. You can't force someone to take accountability if they're not ready. You can't drag someone into growth if they're clinging to avoidance. What you can do is stand firm in your truth. You can refuse to internalize their silence as a reflection of your worth. You can recognize that their inability to face you says far more about them than it ever will about you. If they chose silence, let them sit with it. Don't chase after answers from someone who's unwilling to give them. Don't shrink yourself trying to make sense of someone else's actions. Their silence doesn't define you. Your response to it does. And you have the power to choose peace over chaos, clarity over confusion, and growth over stagnation. Let their silence be their story, not yours. Let it be the space where they figure out what they need to do to grow while you move forward with grace and strength. Because accountability isn't just about admitting faults. It's about being brave enough to grow from them. And if someone isn't ready to take that step, that's not your burden to carry. So when someone ceases all contact to escape accountability, don't take it as a loss. Take it as a sign that you've grown beyond what they're ready to give. And trust that the people who are meant to be in your life will have the courage to stay, to face the hard conversations, to grow with you rather than run from you. Anything less than that, leave it where it belongs, in the silence. When someone cuts off all contact, it's often because they realize you started to see the truth about them. That moment when you begin to connect the dots, when the version of themselves they've tried so hard to present starts to fall apart in your eyes, it's unsettling for them. People like that live for the image, the performance, the carefully curated mask they wear to the world. But when you see through it, when you start to understand what's real and what's not, they panic. Cutting you off becomes their way of protecting the illusion, because letting you stay would mean letting you fully see them, flaws and all. And for someone who's built their identity on the mask, that's something they just can't handle. Think about it. When someone operates from a place of insecurity, they rely on how others perceive them to feel secure. They craft an image, an identity that they think will make them more likable, more respectable, more desirable. Maybe they built themselves up to seem like they're confident or self-assured, or maybe they've leaned into being the victim, always positioning themselves as the one who needs saving. Whatever the narrative is, it's a strategy, a survival tactic, and it works until someone starts to see through it. That's what happened when you began to really see them. You saw the inconsistencies, the cracks in the facade. You saw the moments when their actions didn't match their words, when their promises fell short. See, for someone who spent a lifetime hiding behind a mask, the more uncomfortable being seen can feel like it's not that they wanted to hurt you. It can feel like danger necessarily. And when they sense that exposure coming, their instinct is to retreat, to run, to cut off contact completely. Because as long as they keep their distance, as long as they refuse to engage, they can hold on to the illusion a little longer. They can convince themselves that the version of them you started to see wasn't real, that you were the problem, that you were asking for too much. It's self-preservation, plain and simple. But let's talk about what this does to you, the person left behind. When someone pulls away like that, when they disappear without warning or explanation, it leaves you questioning everything. You start to wonder if you imagined the cracks, if you were wrong to think you saw through them. You wonder if you were too harsh, too critical, too much. But let me tell you something. You weren't wrong. You weren't imagining things. You just were armed. There's something deeper in me. You were seeing them for who they are, not who they pretended to be. And that's not your fault. That's not something you should feel guilty about. The truth is, some people aren't ready to be seen. They're not ready to confront the parts of themselves that they've buried deep. They're not ready to face the inconsistency, the lies told themselves, the things they've tried to hide from the world. And when you started to peel back those layers, it felt exposed, vulnerable, afraid. Cutting contact wasn't about you, it was about them. It was about their fear of being known too deeply, their fear of being held accountable for the person they actually are versus the person they pretend to be. But here's the thing. You seeing the truth is not a bad thing. It's not something to regret or shy away from. It's a reflection of your clarity. What you do need to do is trust your insight, your ability to recognize what's real and what's not. To recognize what's real. And if someone can't handle that, if someone chooses to disappear instead of facing the truth, trust that the discomfort of someone leaving because you saw the truth journey is better than the emptiness of staying in a relationship built on illusions. Trust that the right people, the ones who are willing to be honest and authentic, won't run when you see through them. They'll stay, they'll grow, they'll meet you in that space of truth and vulnerability, because that's where real connection happens. So when someone cuts you off because they realize you've seen the truth about them, let them go. Let them retreat into their silence, into their avoidance. That's their story to navigate, their reality to face. Your story is about truth, about clarity, about standing in the light even when others can't. And when you live in that truth, when you choose to honor what's real over what's convenient, you'll find that the people who belong in your life will never fear being seen. They'll welcome it. They'll grow with you. And that's the only kind of connection worth holding on to. When someone cuts off all contact, it's often because they've realized they can no longer manipulate you. That's a tough pill for some people to swallow, because for them, control is the foundation of the relationship. It might not have been obvious at first. They might not have walked in twirling their mustache like a villain in a movie. Manipulation is often subtle. It's woven into moments where they push boundaries, guilt trip, or twist your words to suit their agenda. It's not always loud and it's not always obvious, but once you spot it, you can't unsee it. And once they realize you've spotted it, they know their grip on you is slipping. That's when the silence comes. That's when they disappear. See, manipulation thrives in the dark, in spaces where things are unclear, where you're questioning yourself, and where you're willing to give the benefit of the doubt over and over again. They thrive in situations where you're constantly second-guessing your feelings, wondering if you're being too sensitive or too demanding. They lean on your kindness, your patience, your desire to make things work. They lean on your kindness, your patience, your desire to make things work. That's how they keep you tied to them, by making you doubt yourself just enough to stay, to keep giving, to keep bending to their will. And as long as you're doing that, they feel safe. They feel like they have the upper hand. But the moment you start to recognize the pattern, the moment you start saying, wait a minute, this doesn't feel right, they feel that shift. They feel you pulling away, reclaiming your power, setting boundaries. And let me tell you, nothing terrifies a manipulator more than boundaries. Boundaries mean they can't just say or do whatever they want. Boundaries mean you're no longer playing by their rules. Boundaries mean their control is slipping. And when they realize that, when they see that they can't reel you back in with the same old tactics, they retreat. They cut off contact. Because staying would mean admitting that they no longer have power over you. And for someone who's built the relationship on control, that's not an option. Now, this might leave you confused, maybe even hurt. You might find yourself asking, if they cared, why would they leave? But here's the thing. Manipulation isn't love. It's not connection. It's not partnership. It's about control, plain and simple. When someone's priority is maintaining control, they're not thinking about how to grow together or how to nurture the relationship. They're thinking about how to keep you in a place where they feel safe and powerful. And when they can't do that anymore, they'd rather walk away than face the reality that the game is over. This isn't about your worth. It's not about whether you were good enough or did enough. In fact, it's often the opposite. People who manipulate often target those who are kind-hearted, empathetic, and willing to see the good in others. They count on your ability to forgive, to give second chances, to keep believing in their potential. But once you start recognizing the pattern, once you start saying, I deserve better, their power over you disappears. That's when they leave. Not because you did something wrong, but because you finally did something right. It's not easy though, is it? It's not easy to let go of the confusion, the doubt, the part of you that still wonders if there's something you could have done differently. But let me tell you this, when someone walks away because they can no longer manipulate you, they're doing you a favor. They're freeing up space in your life for something real, for relationships built on mutual respect and honesty. They're making room for the kind of connection where you don't have to second guess yourself, where you don't have to compromise your peace to keep the other person comfortable. And when you look back, when the dust settles, you'll see it for what it was. You'll see that their silence, their absence wasn't a loss. It was a turning point. It was the moment you reclaimed your power, your voice, your worth. It was the moment you said, I'm not playing this game anymore, and they knew they couldn't keep you on the board. So if someone cuts off all contact because they realize they can't manipulate you anymore, let them go. Let them have their silence. Let them sit with the discomfort of knowing they lost control, not because you were weak, but because you were strong enough to break free. And as you move forward, hold on to that strength. Hold on to the knowledge that real relationships don't require manipulation or control. They're built on trust, on mutual respect, on the willingness to see and accept each other as you are, not as someone else tries to mold you to be. Anything less than that isn't worth your time, your energy, or your peace. When someone cuts off all contact with you, sometimes it's because they know they've outgrown the relationship, and instead of facing that truth, they rather avoid the inevitable discomfort that comes with it. There's a quiet recognition that things have shifted, they've changed, or perhaps you've changed, and what once felt easy or right no longer fits. But instead of acknowledging it, of having a conversation, they choose silence. They cut off communication not because they're mad at you, but because they're avoiding the reality that they can't give you what they once could. Or maybe they know that their own growth has moved them in a different direction, and they're not sure how to navigate that while keeping you around. See, growth is an uncomfortable process. It challenges the status quo. It demands that you face parts of yourself that you might not want to confront. And often when people grow, they realize they need different things in their lives. They may need new experiences, new people, or even new goals that you're no longer part of. It's not personal. It's just part of the natural evolution of life. But for many, acknowledging that they've outgrown relationship feels like an admission of failure. It feels like a betrayal, as if they're somehow abandoning what once was. So instead of dealing with that uncomfortable truth, they avoid it altogether. The thing about outgrowing relationships is that it doesn't always have to be a negative thing. People grow in different directions all the time. It's a part of life. And just because someone has outgrown their connection with you doesn't mean that the relationship didn't serve its purpose. It doesn't mean that it wasn't real. It simply means that the season has passed. It's like looking at a plant that's outgrown its pot. The pot isn't bad, but it's no longer enough to nurture the plant's full potential. And sometimes the people in our lives outgrow us in the same way. They're not necessarily worse for it. They're just evolving. But the challenge comes when they can't face that change. They can't bring themselves to have the conversation where they admit that things are different. They can't say the words that make it clear they need space or time or distance from the relationship. Instead of addressing the fact that they've outgrown what you had together, they cut off contact altogether. It's cleaner for them, less messy, but it leaves you wondering what went wrong. It leaves you questioning your worth, your place in their life. But let me tell you, this is not about you. It's about their inability to face the reality of their own growth. What's important to remember in moments like this is that growth is a deeply personal process. It's not something that can be rushed, forced, or even fully understood by anyone but the person going through it. So when they leave without a word, when they pull away and go silent, it's not a reflection of your value. It's not a commentary on who you are or what you mean to them. It's simply the result of someone being unwilling or unable to acknowledge that they've changed. They may not even realize they've outgrown you until they're already gone. But once they do, they won't know how to make sense of it. They won't know how to explain it. And that discomfort, that unease with the idea of leaving something behind that once had meaning, often manifests in cutting ties completely. Now, this doesn't mean you should chase after someone who's outgrown you. If someone is going to walk away because they're uncomfortable with change, you have to let them. Chasing them, trying to force the connection, will only prolong the inevitable. It's like trying to hold on to something that no longer fits. You'll only end up hurting yourself in the process. The best thing you can do is to acknowledge that growth is a part of life, and that when someone chooses to leave, it's not a reflection of your worth, it's a reflection of their journey. The beauty of outgrowing a relationship is that it opens up space for new growth. It clears the way for relationships that align with who you've become and who you are becoming. So, while it might hurt in the moment, when someone cuts off contact because they've outgrown the relationship, trust that it's making space for something better. Better for you, better for them. And in the end, that's what matters most. It's about evolving into the person you're meant to be, surrounded by the people who will support and nurture that growth. And if someone has to leave in order for that to happen, then let them. The door will close, but another will open, leading you to experiences, people, and opportunities that are meant for your next chapter. Sometimes letting go is the hardest part, but it's also the most freeing. It allows you to step into your own evolution without the weight of someone else's hesitation. Because you deserve connections that honor where you are and where you're going, not relationships that try to hold you back out of fear, guilt, or an unwillingness to change. So when they cut off contact because they've outgrown the relationship, let them. Trust that the growth you're both going through is just the beginning of something new. When someone cuts off contact with you, it often happens because they've realized they're no longer capable of being the person you need them to be, and instead of stepping up to meet that need, they choose to withdraw. It's a hard truth to accept, but sometimes people simply aren't equipped to handle the depth of your expectations, the level of commitment, or the kind of love that you offer. And that's not necessarily a reflection on you. It's more about their limitations, their fears, and their own struggles with vulnerability. See, when you show up in a relationship with all your heart, when you give your time, your trust, and your energy, you're offering something real. You're bringing yourself fully into the connection. You're saying, I'm here, I see you, I want to be a part of your life. That's a powerful thing. It takes courage to give someone else that much access to your world. But not everyone is ready for that kind of connection. Not everyone has the emotional bandwidth, the maturity, or the ability to hold space for someone else's needs without feeling overwhelmed or suffocated. When people come to realize they can't give you what you need, whether it's the emotional support, the consistency, or the depth of connection, they face a choice. They can try to meet those needs, knowing it will require effort and change, or they can walk away. And for many, walking away feels easier. It feels like less work. It means they don't have to confront their own inadequacies or the things that are uncomfortable about being in a relationship. They don't have to face the truth that they can't be the partner you deserve. So they cut contact, they ghost, they fade into silence rather than having the tough conversation. It's avoidance and it's painful, but it's what some people choose when they realize they can't meet your needs. It's important to understand that this isn't necessarily an indictment of who you are. It doesn't mean you're asking for too much. It doesn't mean you're not enough. What it means is that they couldn't meet you where you are in the relationship. They didn't have the capacity to support you in the way you needed them to. And sometimes that happens. Sometimes, no matter how much love, care, and understanding you bring to the table, There are people who simply don't have the tools to reciprocate in the way you deserve. They don't have the emotional maturity to deal with the complexity of your needs. And rather than admit that shortcoming, they choose to retreat. Now, I know it can feel like a rejection. It can feel like you've been abandoned, left in the lurch. It can make you wonder, what did I do wrong? But I need you to hear this loud and clear. You didn't do anything wrong. Wanting someone to show up for you, wanting someone to meet you halfway, to honor the connection, is not asking too much. It's not being unreasonable. If that means repaying a debt for over 3 and 4 years that you rarely even knew, what's unreasonable is expecting you to settle for less than you deserve, to accept a relationship that doesn't meet your needs, and to continue to invest in something that isn't reciprocated. When they leave because they realize they can't give you what you need, it's an unfortunate but necessary moment of truth. It's a wake-up call, not just for you, but for them as well. And while it's painful, it's a sign that they've come to terms with their own limitations. They might not have the courage to admit it, but that's the root of their decision. And at the end of the day, it's better for both of you. Because staying in a relationship where one person can't show up fully isn't fair to either party. It leads to resentment, frustration, and eventually emotional exhaustion. But here's where the real power lies. When they walk away, when they cut contact because they can't be the person you need them to be, that's your cue to step into your own strength. It's your moment to recognize that you don't have to beg for someone to show up for you. You don't have to plead for someone to meet you in your truth. You deserve someone who can meet you where you are, who can match your energy, who can give as much as you give, and who is willing to grow alongside you. And if they're not that person, then let them go. Let them fade into the distance. The right person will come when the space is cleared, when the lesson is learned, and when you're ready to receive them. The truth is, it's not about you not being enough. It's about them realizing they can't rise to the occasion. And that's not your burden to carry. Let them walk away. Let them cut off contact if they feel they can't give you what you need, because that's not a loss for you. That's an opportunity for growth, for understanding what you truly need in a relationship, and for stepping into a future where you no longer settle for anything less than the love and commitment you deserve. So when they walk away because they can't meet your needs, understand this. You are worthy of someone who can. You are worthy of someone who can meet you halfway, who can give as much as you give, who can show up in the relationship with the same energy and intention that you bring. And when you stand in that truth, when you recognize your worth, you'll see that their absence is not a hole to fill, but a space for something even greater to enter.